Thank you, and thank you all for coming this evening. I just wanted to say a few words quickly, just to say what a pleasure it is to be here in the middle of this beautiful exhibition of Graeme's work. And obviously it's in some ways a sad occasion because Graeme can't be with us, but we do have his beautiful paintings to look at. And I know many people in this room will have known Graeme and know his work, but this is probably the most substantial selection of his work that's been available for people to see for a very long time. And it really has been a great privilege to be able to be involved with this. So we're going to have we're going to try and make this as informal a conversation as we can here. And we will give you the opportunity to ask questions later as well. But if anybody perhaps might want to say something or contribute something, just put up your hand, let us know. So I think we sort of thought we'd start in a way at the beginning with Eddie sort of saying a bit about how you came to know Graeme when you first met him. And
yeah, thanks. Well, it's quite amazing to be in the room with the work, obviously, and there's so many folk here that know Graeme probably as well as and better than us. So I think the chance to kind of add in some questions later on will be amazing. And for me, being back in this room, because there's Mike Windle here. Mike Windle wrote the introduction of a catalogue that myself and Derek Guild had many years ago, almost starting a kind of art career in Edinburgh for me. So it's great seeing so many folk here and tutors, colleagues that worked with Graeme and family and everything. So it's amazing. Now, I met Graeme when he was 17-year-old and I was 18, and we'd both just arrived at Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art. Almost the kind of first week meeting him, I kind of had a real kind of attraction to this guy with kind of hair out to here, and I don't know, just a kind of we just had a natural bonding, and a lot of it was through music and going back to Graeme's house, and it was kind of odd living kind of situations back then in Dundee in the 80s. That was almost 40 years ago. Graeme was living in an attic room in a house that was owned by this, I think she was Eastern European or landlady, that if you turned up to kind of visit Graeme, she'd sometimes say, no, Graeme's busy, he's reviving or he's studying, and wouldn't let us up to Graeme's room. And of course, before the kind of mobile phones, etc., you couldn't actually visit Graeme. He'd be up in his room, you'd step outside and you'd hear Sun Ra or something coming out of and it was just this landlady wouldn't let us into the room. So it was amazing kind of that initial period of being students, working with Graeme, and just seeing the work now and thinking back to that work 40 years ago of space and things connected with kind of extraterrestrial in a way, world was starting to happen in his paintings then. And just driving here tonight, I just thinking about the last time I was with Graeme, and with them in spirit as well, because I was asked by Liz to kind of write something for the funeral, which was kind of humbling, but you had to have a kind of out-of-body experience to be able to read that thing. And it wasn't until I sat down and realised I'd missed a whole page. And I wondered if it was Graeme that kind of just nudged me along a bit, because it was about 3 days before the funeral, I kind of visited Graeme in my dream, and I was kind of asking him, like, what will I say, what will I write about, and he was saying, it's fine, just mention Liz and the kids, and it's all been fantastic. And I said, I've got that down, but it sounds more like a best man speech. And in our dream, Graeme saying, just don't have any sexual innuendos, or don't sort of say how beautiful the crematorium staff are, and you'll be fine. And we had this chat, and I said, can I read out a poem? And he said, who is it by? And I replied, Bono. And of course, Graeme replied, dear Bongo, no. And our last kind of day with him in his house, in his studio, we were talking about Bono's famous letter to Captain Beefheart, where he asked Captain Beefheart to kind of collaborate with him, and Captain Beefheart's reply was, dear Bongo, no. And we were just all night, we were just sort of saying, dear Bongo, no. And that was Graeme's voice just coming back to me in my bed, and I think I woke up and my pillow was kind of wet with tears because we'd been laughing with each other's company again. So that was kind of almost the first and last meeting with Graeme, but tons of stuff in between, which I'm sure we'll get a chance to discuss. I'm the slightly off-academic approach here, because obviously we've got a writer and a student and a curator here, and I'm sort of coming in with a sort of different angle. So.
Well, I'll do the curating bit if you like.
Yeah.
And although I would like to say something else, of course, about friendship later on, but I'll start by saying one thing that not all of you may know, I had a gallery for a long time in London, and I worked with Graeme from 1997 through till when the gallery closed in 2014. So I knew him professionally for quite a long time, but when I closed the gallery, I moved to Scotland, and I moved to Dunbar. So I got to know Graeme and Liz a lot better then, and obviously I was seeing his work on a more regular basis, and I was seeing him obviously working on it as well, not literally working, but we're discussing the work on a quite regular basis. So I came to have a better understanding of the work during that last 2 years that I was in. The first 2 years I was in Scotland, the 2 years I was in Dunbar before I moved to Glasgow. But my first meeting with Graeme was as a show in the CCA in Glasgow in 1995 called The Persistence of Painting, which curator Nicola White had put together, which was the first time that it was in a way quite an important show for its time, showing a group of just painters. There were a number, Julie Roberts, Richard Wright, Louise Hopkins, Carol Rhodes, Richard Walker, Hayley Tompkins, all of whom some of them had already had some exposure, but most of them, that was the first time they'd really shown anywhere. And I was saw Graeme's work there, but I'd already heard about him because Ewan MacArthur, would that be somebody?
Ewan MacArthur,
yeah. I think I meant to look him up, but I had a meeting with him when I came to Scotland in '95, and he recommended that I looked at Graeme's work. And that's one of the reasons I went to see the CCA show. So, because I was working on a show of landscape painting at that time, I wanted to put Graeme in that. And so that was the first time that we'd worked together. It was a show in 1997 in the gallery in London. One of the first shows I did, actually, one of the first 5 shows I did. And then there was a solo show in '98, and then there were a number of solo shows after that. So I'd seen the work develop over a number of years, and it's what's nice about this show is that I hadn't realised there's the painting that's on the left-hand side at the end of the gallery was a work that was in a show at the Fruit Market Gallery in 1999, and I didn't realise there were any works from that group left. So I thought when we were putting this together, Liz and I thought it would be nice to include that as a starting point. And what's interesting, again, looking at this, is how consistent Graeme's work was since then. You can see so many elements in that were explored further and further as the work developed. And right up until the end, I remember just all these conversations about, drawing, and I'm doing this, and then I do this, and then I'll add this, and it was like a sort of an alchemist in a way, working with different materials, and that I think is the fascinating thing. How Graeme used materials to create these extraordinary spaces, and how he used colour, and how things were built up sort of organically. There was never really a sort of starting point. No, I've got an idea of what this is going to turn out like. I'm going to start drawing, and let's see. Well, what happens if I do this? What if I pour this varnish, and then what happens? So I think that sort of, there's this fascinating, almost like I'm learning everything I do. I learn something from, and I think that's something that, you said this before. I think that Graeme said to me he didn't come from art. He had to find out what it was for him, and that was looking at anything really that was in it. Could have been old master painting, could have been a comic book. He had Dan Dare. He loved the elements from Dan Dare comic book. Almost everything, really. That was something, presumably, he was, when you were a student, was he just looking at everything?
And improvisation, I think, which is evident in all the work. As you say, the experimentation, improvisation, of not really knowing how you're just in that zone. It's a kind of clunky way the artist describes it. Well, I can't think of another word we've got apart from being in the zone. But I haven't heard of anybody else describe that thing we're in when we're in there, and that kind of beauty and space. And I think Graeme was, for me, the artist that was sort of in the zone virtually all the time. To the point of, am I safe sitting in the car with him? He was just in there all the time. It was incredible, just in that, working stuff out, seeing stuff, that vision, that visionary world that artists, when we're in there, we know how, that's why we do it, the kind of elevation and the reward and the buzz that you get from that. And Graeme was just somebody that was in there all the time in that kind of hallowed space, you know. Yeah.
Was that something that you, when as a tutor, how was he?
So I met Graeme in 2006 at ECA when I started drawing and painting, and he was my first tutor at art school and also my last tutor. So Graeme really bookended my experience as being an art student at ECA. And over the past few weeks, I've been trying to think about our conversations that we had during the tutorials. And what I realised was that I think I did most of the talking and Graeme did most of the listening. And that in itself is a kind of skill, because he wasn't someone who tried to dictate to you or tell you what you should do. He was letting you find your own way through the work, and then he would kind of pick up on certain things. And he was very, you know, I would be talking at length, trying to justify maybe the next move that I make, and he would just shrug his shoulders and say, just do it, you know, just, because that's what painting is, you know, it's doing it, which is kind of what you were saying before. It's the what if I do this, what if I do that, and seeing what happens. And for me, his paintings are this mixture of the intentional, the incidental, and the accidental all coming together to create these really rich, spatially complex paintings that really suck you in. They're like this vacuum that just...
Yeah, I'm trying not to stare at this painting over here, you know, and I think most of the paintings in this exhibition, you kind of have to look at them aside. They're so immense, aren't they? They're just, you just pull you through into some other portal of space and time, and just they're incredible, and the subtlety and the complexity and the physicality of them. And I always remember that about Graeme as being quite the physicality of him. And thinking back to see Alan Johnson, there was something that maybe Alan organised. It was a residency Graeme did. It was in Japan, and I'm coming back, and he was saying he was working in 30-degree heat in the studio, making these enormous paintings. He came back, the endurance, the physical kind of like work that he kind of offered in the making up mental and physical. And I think you can see that in all his works, just that kind of space and energy, and you know.
There's certainly an investment in the actual making. I think it's you know, he said he's always doodling. I mean, I think he was, as a child, he'd tell somebody who was the opening said he'd asked Graeme once, you know, Graeme said, I was always drawing, and he was making doodles, you know, so even, and in a sense he's just never stopped. And I think that, but it's that ability to, I mean, one of the things there are a few things here that I'd never seen before, including the big painting that we're sitting in front of, because Graeme sent me photographs of it when it was just after he'd finished it, and it was due to be shown here. Was it 2020? It was I think it was the show that Graeme was curating, and then, but unfortunately it couldn't happen in reality because of COVID. But seeing it here, and once it was on the wall, it's extraordinary because the scale of it compared to most of what he'd been working on when I was living in Dunbar was small. And then to see this, and the fact that there is so much, and it works on a big scale. Often my experience is that actually artists have a way of working on a small scale and who try to scale it up. Though it doesn't always succeed, but that looks as though it's somebody who's been used to making big paintings for years. So his technical ability to do something on a small scale and on a large scale was pretty exceptional, I think. I mean, there's not many artists who can do that and carry it off with such aplomb. And you know, you don't, but you're absorbed into some of the, but look at the ground on that sort of mottled granite. So I think it's painted over a grey. I mean, I'm not a painter. This is not, we should be getting the two people on either side of me to talk about that. But you know, I'm fascinated by how artists make things, and that detail, and a lot of what the conversation I was having in the studio in Graeme's house in Dunbar was about, you know, I'm trying this, I've got these new pastels, I'm trying this, I'm going to grind them up and see what, you know, and then he'll play around with dropping things into wet varnish, like poppy seeds, for example. There are quite a few of these. There are lots of poppy, little marks in poppy seeds. I'll see what that's going to, do that. There was this constant fascination with what materials can do. Oh, I haven't tried this before.
He once said something to me that you have to remember to put one tool down to pick another tool up, which I always kind of, when I'm in the studio making paintings, you do have a tendency to want to repeat yourself because there is a comfortability in that. And I think with Graeme's paintings, there is always that sense of kind of playfulness and experimentation. And in a conversation that we had when he had a show in London, he described his paintings as a puzzle without end, a puzzle that doesn't need to be solved. And I think that, in a way, these are paintings for painters because they do just captivate you and you want to try and work out how they've been made, the kind of decision-making process that's gone into them, the sequence of events, and really they're kind of impossible to work out. And the same with the kind of scale that you were talking about.
Yeah, they tend. There is obviously you can see in this room there was a sort of standard sort of size that and sort of a larger size and a smaller size, but that towards later on that was sort of broken down a bit, and then you would get bigger paintings and smaller. But the ability to move between those two seemingly effortlessly. I'm sure it probably wasn't, but I mean, I think it's quite remarkable. It's to see them together, and there's such a the details of certain. I've just actually noticed the two paintings on the reverse side of the wall you're here. There's one called Hare Hunt, and the small framed work on not in this room, in the other room, but there's a sort of long cylindrical shapes which appear most obviously in the largely black and white drawing, a small painting, and then the shapes reappear in the Hare Hunt, and they're both. I now realise because he mentioned this. There's a certain Paul Klee work that he was obsessed by called Open Mountain. And actually, that's where and I found an image of that in the catalogue recently, of the original, and that's where those shapes came from. But it's a very strange little painting, and he was very interested in clay, I suspect, partly because of these little worlds that clay created. And Graeme's was about creating worlds that you could inhabit, that he could inhabit when he was making them. And I think that we can all inhabit when we look at them. I think that was really quite important. And other ways of using space, Chinese and drawing, Chinese painting, Japanese screens, Japanese prints, drawings by artists like particularly Albert Alperdorfer, this sort of 16th century German sort of Rhine or Danube school with lots of sort of weirdly sort of Gothic trees and sort of foliage and things. They were kind of, and he worked in Rie and on the outskirts of Basel as well as in Osaka. So there was this kind of cultural references going on all over the place. And then towards, later on the Italian Renaissance and medieval drawing. Remember, he said he told me when I was I think it was when I was in Dundee. I found this book on medieval drawing. It's absolutely, I spent a lot of time looking at that, and that started coming into the work, the drawings in the later works in particular. But it was this eclectic fascination with lots of different things. And then there's something from a Dundee comic that fits in as well. So you get Albrecht Outdoor and Dundee in the same painting. I don't think anybody else has done that. But it's just endlessly fascinating.
And sci-fi was a big thing.
Oh yeah. I think that's something that, again, I didn't, because was never a big sci-fi fan, but I think I've sort of started to pick up. Yeah, sure.
You said somewhere, wrote somewhere that there was something psychedelic about
Yeah.
You thought how Graeme was, you first wanted to
Yeah, through music and...
Did he listen to music when he was working?
Well, yeah, I would imagine. His studio had most of the CDs, And when we met, psychedelia was legal then, as a way, of young people sort of like experimenting with magic mushrooms and all. That was legal 40 years ago. You can buy it in the shops, newsagents. And so it was great for us, interested in music, interested in psychedelia, nature, just a different, it kind of removed you from that kind of world. We'd both arrived from Graeme from Cumbernauld, I was from the schemes of Dundee, and it just opened it, portals of different ways of looking and seeing and connecting with art across the world, and I think connected with a lot of our friends through that as well, through that psychedelic experience, you know, which very few folk talk about because it's kind of like seen as a kind of druggy thing or something. But psychedelia is a valid, visionary.
It was Graeme who introduced me to Philip K. Dick. He was obviously, you know, experimented with LSD. And I remember having conversations with him about various books, and there was film adaptations, and there was these concepts, these kind of Greek concepts of the idios cosmos and the koinos cosmos. The idios cosmos being this unique kind of private world, and the koinos cosmos being the shared collective world. And I feel like that's something that Graeme's paintings kind of inhabit. There's this personal cosmos that he's creating, but then at the same time it kind of opens up into this kind of more sort of universal type of space that we can all inhabit and share.
I think that's happened with the later, the Hermit House paintings, the little small houses, and these works like the big painting called the Master's Chamber, and the sort of untitled because we didn't know what Graeme was going to call them, but the sort of I'm looking into this sort of void, this square rectangular void at the end. Is these portals between one space and one reality and another. Is how he talked about them. And I think actually having finally got around, I never. Confessions of things I should have done years ago was watch 2001: A Space Odyssey, but I'd suddenly read that there's a scene in that which I'm sure Graeme is referring, because there's this looking up at this into this huge great sky that comes up. I mean, I just I don't know why I hadn't seen this film before, but anyway, that seems to me I mean, he talked a lot about Tarkovsky's Solaris and Stalker, but I mean, and he'd mentioned 2001: A Space, but as I'd never seen it, I didn't ask him too much more about that. We did talk about Tarkovsky, so I think I missed out a bit there, because I should have asked him more about 2001: A Space Odyssey, but I think that must have been something that was an influence on him, because it just, having now seen it. But that idea of being on the edge of one reality and bringing another one in, and trying to create some sort of way of connecting between the two.
Yeah, and the surface is that boundary, isn't it? That surface is that one world, and then stepping into this imagined other reality that's existing at the same time, because you don't kind of question the paintings, do you? They're so convincing, they're so beautifully perfect, you don't question them of being right or wrong, or they exist in that as reality, and there's a kind of almost like the surface is the kind of layer that you would step through into that.
But there's also this this kind of fracturing of screen, this sort of, Graeme remember did about sort of computer games, when you get a glitch on, or early before you would get a glitch and something was, that, I think that, thinking about that with that, for example, in that one. And there is actually there's a cutout of a photograph of a building in the middle of that painting, which I hadn't really noticed before, but that's a sort of, again, it's another sort of reality. He would do that occasionally. There are occasional little postcards on things. There is one in that, set in the varnish. No, it'd be cut out. It would have been cut out from a book or a postcard, I suspect. I mean, there was a larger painting that had a postcard and actually stuck onto it. So he would use actual photographs sometimes, not very often, but that one, I think he sometimes tried and they didn't work out, but that's another little tiny snippet of something. But you get fragments of things if they've been cut into, because there are so many layers. If he would sometimes, score through something and take something out and add over the top of it. So you get the painting right at the end of the gallery on the right. That's got in the bottom left-hand corner, I've just noticed there's a small area of brushed paintwork which has been left from something else. It's only a small tiny detail, but it's rather beautiful. And the way that you will see in the same painting, the varnish or something or the gesso is cracked, but he's just left it and then put another layer on the top of it. So it's things that can go wrong that he's added to. I mean, that was one of the things that you didn't know what you were going to do. You're going to pour varnish on something and leave it. Then you had to work on what's left or what happens. So he would do that. It was an organic process of developing something over time. Yep.
It was just feeding in with two things that a couple of you said. Graeme was my shooting in 2007 after I sent it to your painting, and it was just magical. And the conversations always covered architecture, about how righteous and how well-meaning Basil Spence was, building the Gorbals, new town development, Cumbernauld, and we always talked about astrophysics as well. But he really encouraged me. I got quite guilty because I was only looking at Scottish landscape painters, and he said to me it was a long and noble tradition, and whereas everybody was saying you've got to be doing this, you've got to be doing that, he was saying just stay in the landscape, Scottish landscape section of the library, and it's all fine. But he would come and spend maybe 10-15 minutes a week with you, and from that it was just boom, and you would spend the rest of your week trying to achieve whatever it was and all these sparks would go off in your head and you were running with them, and then he would come back and you would just go off in another trajectory. It was magical.
Yeah. We were going to mention also obviously the curatorial aspect of Graeme's side, because as Andrew introduced, this was going to be a show that Graeme was curating. Well, it was during I remember we were actually just about to install, and that was the start of lockdown. Everybody would flee home, weren't really sure what was doing, that kind of terror. But I think that kind of curatorial side that Graeme and Liz worked with, it kind of like put Dunbar on the map in a sense, isn't it? Just these exhibitions that quite a few of us in the room were involved with the Polar Cap, and incredible, the generosity and the spirit, and it was so exciting being part of them. It was just really kind of it was the opening, it was the party, it was the people who were involved, and it was also the artists that Graeme and Liz brought together. Some of them were students, still students, but have gone on. Obviously, they had an eye on these students are amazing, and they've gone off to be amazing kind of artists, or some of them were kind of older artists that Graeme admired. So it was kind of generational. And also he was able to bring in, artists making new collaborations. He was able to bring in the Boards of Canada into the exhibition that, nobody had ever really seen them physically as artists, let alone kind of gallery installed work. So it was that really interesting kind of, that kind of, that extension to the art world that Graeme and Liz were involved with. And for me, working with Graeme, that goes right back to 40 years ago, where I think we just graduated and we organised this exhibition on this ship in Dundee. It's called the Unicorn. It's the oldest floating warship in Britain. And my dad used to be a sailor and somehow kind of knew folk in the harbour, and we managed to get access to this boat. And this was like mid-80s. People weren't really kind of organising exhibitions. We organised this exhibition on this ship and Graeme had, I don't know, this is before internet, but he had this, was a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of how to make wine in 2 weeks from Five Alive juice. I mean, Five Alive isn't even a juice, it's kind of juice drink, isn't it? It's like juice-flavoured water. And so we kind of had this recipe, got all the right yeast, bought buckets, made this stuff the night before the opening, tasted it, yeah, God, that works. It was like, it's like yeasty kind of orange drink, so we had buckets of this stuff at the opening. Graeme had somehow got this band, this like quartet that was avant-garde, woozy music. The paintings, because it was in a historic ship, they couldn't be fastened to the wall. They were hanging in wires and they were all kind of moving backward and forward. And gallons of this kind of like homemade yeast orange-flavoured yeast wine, and it was just that kind of like, let's do it, it was kind of the music aesthetics, like let's put on the gig. We're not waiting for the kind of promoter or the gallery, let's just put it on. And I think that was with working with Liz, is that's what happened in Dunbar. Let's just do this here, let's take it into Edinburgh, let's bring in these artists from across Europe, and had Japanese artists involved as well, and just kind of sharing, I think, a kind of experience, and for artists, just that the buzz of coming together with like-minded souls and making and exhibiting, and it's generosity. And so, for me, obviously, Graeme couldn't be Graeme without kind of the creativity of Liz as well, who was a tutor in Edinburgh. I mean, for Graeme to be in that zone all the time, you couldn't be in there without a guiding hand. And it's very rarely mentioned, isn't it, the artists' partners who are keeping them in that zone, keeping them, enabling them to be in the studios, and and Graeme wouldn't have managed. I think you can make toast, and you couldn't, and so it was brilliant, so just having, probably the greatest kind of support, isn't it, is that artist kind of family and network to be able to kind of be there,
I feel like what you were saying there about having the homemade wine and being on this boat, that's kind of the feeling that I get when I look at Graeme's paintings now. There's that kind of unsteadiness of what am I actually looking at.
Yeah.
Because they're very difficult in some ways to talk about.
Yeah.
To assign kind of language or words to them. They kind of escape easy description.
Yeah. And we were going to mention, because we know Graeme as a painter, but I have, and Mike has managed to curate Graeme into different exhibitions. Of one project, Mike Windle and I curated, it was called Digital VD, and it was getting artists to make 1-minute films, and Graeme made the film. So, most people have never seen a Graeme Todd film. We have that in our archive. We also, it was an exhibition, Dr. Skin, where we're invited artists to design tattoos, and so there was no work on the wall. The only way you were able to see the artwork was seeing the tattoo placed on the body of the wearer, and Liz took part in this as well. And so there's a tattoo designed by Graeme. And then I've also included an exhibition I curated called Between the Late and Early. I managed to record Graeme making music. So the exhibition catalogue came with a CD of artists who were involved in the exhibition, but also were sonic artists and made sound and recordings. So I managed to make a recording of Graeme in his living room and improvised. Can you imagine that's what it's like? Graeme with some toy frog and a squeaky thing, and fascinated with the puffin laughter.
That's right.
Got fascinated with the sound. Eddie, listen to this is a puffin. Ha ha ha. And he listened to that for about a month. Ha ha ha. And yeah.
Yeah, I think this all comes. There was always it comes back to this enthusiasm he had for art, and it was this, and the joy that he had, that it gave him to have, and I think that was where there's all this enthusiasm for, and he wanted to share that with everybody else, and everybody else to join in. I mean, it was one thing. It's very. When I moved to Dunbar, it was just. I mean, so one of the reasons was that Graeme and Liz were living there, because I think that was, and it was a beautiful place to be, and at what was a difficult time for me. And they were great. I remember the first New Year, we went for a long walk on New Year's Eve, and then I went to various friends. Everybody was touring around various friends. It was lovely. It's my sort of first welcome to Scotland as after I'd moved there, and that was just really nice. And then we talk about work in the studio, and then we say, well, it's time to go to the volunteers. No, we'd moved on to beer by that point. So we went to the volunteers, which was the pub in Dunbar. So we used to end up there after discussing work. And then we continued to talk about art and things, and over a pint in the volunteers, which was very nice, even if it was only 3:00 in the afternoon. But anyway. So yeah, I mean, that was just a wonderful sort of time, and walking. I mean, that's the other thing is that I think is really important is that the natural landscape around Dunbar was really important, and that shoreline, this really strange shoreline, and the fact you've got these geological layers, literally, and this idea of deep time that he was really interested in, and that was the guy who came up with this. It was at Hutton, I think, who kind of had done a lot of his in sort of south, the coast south of Dunbar. And that was really, I think, key. And these strange rock formations. I mean, some of the titles came from, there's one little painting called The Grips, which are these little rocks, I think, just outside Dunbar, outside the harbour. So there was a lot of that. And also looking into, rock pools and things. And we were going walking along the coast, and just as this tide was going, these sort of it's a very strange landscape, actually. It's even odd now because there's a golf course along part of it, which is so this odd, weird combination of the man-made and the sort of the weird things that golf courses are as far as landscape is concerned. And then you had this concrete work, this sort of modern concrete and the manufacturing place, and then the lighthouse in the distance. So you had this really strange combination, the man-made, and old lime kilns as well. They hadn't disused lime kilns been made in the 18th or the 19th century. So there was this strange industrial and then very, very, very old geological landscape, and the kind of the big skies as well. So that was really important. I think that sort of space within, different sorts of spaces, landscape spaces enclosed within a sort of fairly small area. So that was another. I think that's another thing it's worth bearing in mind when you're looking at the work. Actually, there was a lot of actual real landscape in them,
and they also feel quite timeless in the sense that they don't really belong to a particular era. They're very difficult to place in a kind of chronology, especially within painting.
Yeah. Yes. You could. This is.
They're almost like paintings from the future.
Yeah. Well, I think he would have loved that. I mean, that's what I think. That's where he would have been very happy with that description.
Yeah, looking over there, I keep seeing that. I can see the hind two legs of a beast, and it's that kind of almost the future is a horse, and it's going back to sort of 40,000-year-old painting, right to the future, isn't it? It's just in there, isn't it? Just and it's sort of this nation's not quite grasped how amazing a painter Graeme is, an artist. The fact that they're all still here, there's so many of them in the studio. I mean, Graeme's daughter Naomi was saying there's about 280 paintings catalogued, which is incredible output, but you think, where is the vision of this nation and the people? The work, actually, I just assumed they were all sold. They're incredible kind of work there.
Question?
You were saying that he never knew what he was going to do with a painting. How did he actually start a painting?
Just started drawing. That's what he told me. He would just start drawing.
Did he throw paint on the canvas?
No. It would start with a drawing. It would literally prepare the ground, and then he'd start drawing. That's what he told me to say. It would be usually with a pen of some sort. That's what it would always start with a drawing.
Sometimes he would put a wash on.
Would you put a wash on for? Yeah.
And just see what it did. As it dried, it would puddle into certain areas, and then he would improvise in these areas. So he did do that as well.
But it was always an improvisatory sort of thing to start, wasn't it? It wasn't. I'm going to start with a,
No, he didn't plan to do this and then do this. He watched what the painting did, and he joined in.
Was he not quite particular about how the boards were made up, though? Did he not really keep? I remember him saying that he spent quite some detail making sure that they were kind of sanded down and perfect. Or am I misremembering?
No, I think you're right. Warping was something he worried about.
Yeah, well, that.
And so he had a cabinet maker at one point made these structures that you could hardly lift. And when we were moving his work into the studio, a lot of works were really heavy. And someone who helped us and worked in the gallery said I'd forgotten just the weight of Graeme Todd. And sometimes it took two people to lift quite.
There was that did become, there were problems with the paintings warping. That's because I think they weren't as well to start with. He just would have this board and then stick edges around them. But then the problem was because the amount of varnish that was on them, you take them into different temperature zones and they went boom.
Yeah,
and they did very so that got sorted out. But they did. There was a stage when they were warping.
Yeah.
So that's when that's why he started to really focus on constructing them a bit more stably. Yes, and get them made like tabletops almost, which is why they were very heavy. But yes, they would. Yeah, he would prepare. They would prepare the grounds. I mean, they would. That would be something
that.
That.
Behind you is a canvas, and he rarely used canvas. Just before he died, he bought a big kind of roll of canvas, and so he was intending using that in a big roll of paper as well, because he seldom drew on paper, but he did do it and enjoyed doing it. So these are the works that we didn't get to see, but it's nice to see a canvas.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of the first paintings of his that I saw were actually on canvas, and then he started stretching that over board, and then would work more and more exclusive on board. But the big paintings he made in Osaka were on canvas, though, weren't they? I think, yeah. So there was something he really wanted to make big things. I think perhaps the practicality of actually moving a board that size would be almost impossible to lift.
Yeah.
So I think that was part of it. But the fact that he could do that on the scale, and I know other painters I've worked with who either do work on canvas or they work on board and don't like working on one, or for very reason they don't like working on one or the other. I mean, Carol Rhodes, who I mentioned, she didn't like canvas at all, always worked on board. Because she didn't like she said, I can't work on canvas, it's sort of, I have to have a hard ground to work on. But Graeme didn't seem to mind. I mean, he obviously liked both and could work on both.
Yeah, when we were in Osaka, the weather was record temperatures.
Yeah.
And when he arrived with a box of paints and some brushes. And they were expecting a video artist because he thought nobody is going to be able to work in this heat. And Graeme walked round a park pushing our 2-year-old son, thinking, what am I going to do, what am I going to do? And the next morning he said, I'm going to make, pardon my French, but big fuck off painting. Which he did.
Yeah. I think those must have been the biggest things he'd made. Oh no, some of the early works were quite big. There was the one that was shown in Summer Hall, and it was at the RSA in the summer show, wasn't it?
Yeah,
the early one.
That's in the collection here.
Yeah. And those, I think he told me those were made. He made those just pinned to the wall and then stretched them afterwards. Because I think that was made in Dundee. I think that painting.
Yeah, it's quite an older one, isn't it? Yeah.
Well,
that's when he had the flat. He had the flat in Dundee. He used the floor. The living room was the studio and the floor was the palette. And he was, you're kind of like, there was mixing up big pools of colour and glitter and cats would be walking through it and it'd be, yeah.
So he was making those on the floor?
Well, you'd be using the floor as a palette.
Oh, it's a palette.
Yeah,
right,
there were floorboards.
Yeah, right.
That's quite fancy in Dundee, isn't it? Like a painted carpet. That's before we had carpets in Dundee. We just had
very
painted
sympathetic
floors.
landlord.
Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah. And the Graeme was quite good at all that, actually. That was the point where, you remember folk were kind of like getting these black boxes to make an electricity meter go backwards. And remember Graeme put the thing in, the whole thing blows up, and the whole tenement goes off, And you had to kind of be careful. You put the black box in it, it whizzed your electric meter backwards so much that it was back further than it was the last reading. So the guy comes round to read it and is going, hold on a minute, we owe you 50 quid. It was kind of... Yeah, but that was the roof. Yeah, we used to go, that was the attic room, and it had a little kind of flat roof bit on top, and I had a pair of headphones that for some reason had about 20 kind of foot cable. That was before Bluetooth and everything, and we used to go out on the roof and take turns and listen to the kind of music, and at night, it was about the size of this bit here, and it was like 3 stories up, and just getting into music and listening, and occasionally you'd kind of move and you'd hear the amplifier getting pulled off the shelf onto the floor, but and climbing out and listening to music and seeing stuff and seeing the future. Yeah, and Don Cherry kind of played in Dundee a couple of times, and that was kind of big thing, just sort of seeing that kind of live, high-end improvised music, Yeah. But I think one parting thing is, for me, and it was a conversation here with Graeme and Derek Guild, and Graeme was talking about art, and he said, it doesn't matter who made the art, the price of it, anything. He always said, but is it any good? And I think for Graeme's, that's the thing, they are good. He just got them to that quality, doesn't it? Because he would always just say, but are they any good? Doesn't matter the meaning, the history, the value, are they any good? And you can look at every single one in this exhibition and you go, fuck, they're amazing. The quality control there was just immaculate.
Yeah. Was there, I saw a hand up over
Yeah,
there.
sorry,
Did you
yeah.
say-
I was just going to say, obviously, the people who were top buying got a lot from him, but do you think he got anything from being a tutor at ECU?
Definitely. He used to introduce himself as a painter, but importantly as a tutor. It was a big thing for him, wasn't it? Yeah.
I think that's what I was saying before, where he was listening to what you were saying, and he was actually listening. It wasn't as if he was feigning interest. He was actually genuinely interested in what you were interested in, and he was kind of soaking that up so that he could then, respond to that in a very kind of authentic and genuine way, because he genuinely cared about what it was that you were doing.
Yeah, I've met quite a lot of these ex-students during this time because they've been messaging me on Instagram or they come into the gallery. In fact, there's been a lot of people coming into the gallery saying they were taught by Graeme. And I think, what was I going to say? Forgotten what I was going to say. It's my age, I'm sorry. Yeah, just to go back to being important, what he was giving out. He brought that home with him as well. He talked about students at home. He was concerned about them. He wanted them to get the best. And I think what's been interesting that I remember now is that a lot of students that I've seen, and yourself included, or Rachel who works here, remembers certain things that Graeme said to them, and that really is a lasting tribute.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point then, because Nick's given me the kind of like what to think about wrapping up, unless there are other questions.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier about the zone, which I see as flow, and when I look at these paintings, they seem very soulful and trying to capture energy. Fair enough, when you're younger, you can take magic mushes. But how did he try and tap into that energy when he was older?
Yeah, how, just through.
I mean, you're saying
Skill-
he's
yeah.
listening to music, but
Well, just-
did he meditate or did he do Tai Chi?
Well, painting is meditation. When we forget about that, like meditation in such a broad terms, that zone is you're making art. It is that you're in that period of the here and now, and and I think it's through just work.
I think
Well, what I didn't understand earlier is guy with a, sorry, I forgot.
That's right.
He's saying that he started out with a drawing.
Yeah.
I mean, I know about painting myself, and if you're trying to be free, you start off by like throwing the paint around and see what happens and see what comes out of that. Like you're saying, it's an organic process. To me, a drawing is like picking out details later on. So, I mean,
that painting that's beside your head, you can see there's been a ground put on and then a wash put on, and the drawing probably came when that wash had dried and you could see.
yeah, but that's what I was thinking, that it's got to come after, because you've got to start with like the big stuff first
Yeah.
and then fill it in.
You did on that one, certainly, that's beside you. And to get in the zone, he did wear like big headphones. And that kept things out as well.
Got my limit.
But one of the things that he said to me was, it's not about being new, it's about being now. And I think that idea of being present, being present in the moment to make a painting, and being present in the moment to look at a painting, I think that's kind of, and that's a kind of hard thing to do a lot of the time. And you were asking about how, the paintings might be made, but painting is in itself a kind of system of knowledge. And the fact that you were saying he's made 280 paintings, I mean, with that comes this knowledge. So on the one hand, there's the improvisational aspect, but also there is a kind of knowledge that Graeme will have accrued and built up over like 4 decades of making paintings.
But to me, you've got to get the knowledge and then trust your instinct.
Mm.
And then that's what makes it organic. So you're trying to tap into the energy that's around you.
Mm.
And that's what I've always got from his work, like even like way back in the 90s.
Mm.
So I was just wondering how he goes about it, because I'm interested in the process.
he liked going for walks as well. I
Mhm.
mean, nature was a big inspiration to him. And when we lived in Rucklaw, we were surrounded by trees, and that's when the trees are in his paintings. But when we moved to Dundee, he was, as Andrew's talked about, he was fascinated by the rocks in Dundee.
Did they start fishing?
And he didn't start fishing,
Mm.
and he certainly didn't start golf.
Right. I think that's a good line to end on, isn't it?
Oh, s-
One, is that right? Go for it.
Graeme,
Yeah.
so Graeme and I shared a bedroom with my kids, etc. So I could possibly spend an hour taking you back to that period of his life prior to him being a famous artist. But what I have to say is it's an immense journey to get to the stage where we are now, knowing Graeme my whole life. Graeme never faltered, he never did anything other than art. Once he got his degree, he lived in the breadline. Graeme had no money. Times were really, really tight for Graeme. And there's 4 years difference between him and I felt like a millionaire when I went to go and see Graeme, and I felt as though I was taking humanitarian aid parcels and shirts. And I wrote next to someone today that Graeme gave me a painting in exchange for some shirts and a pair of football boots. But he just never took up any employment at all. He just painted and painted and painted. And that's the thing that I admire the most about him. And to just kind of confirm what you were saying, Eddie, Graeme never got into the zone because he went to Dundee. Graeme was always in the zone. That's why as the first child he always get caught. He got caught for everything. And as a second child I got away with murder because I was never in the zone. Not in Graeme's zone. And it was that balance of common sense versus what can I get out of life and what can I get out of art that always set Graeme apart, even as a young teenager, to be fair. And with my friends, they loved Graeme coming down because there was just this thing that Graeme had going on that they'd never experienced before. And Graeme could just sit for hours staring at something and then come up with a one-line thing that
Send more money.
was brilliant.
Yeah.
Graeme's one of the funniest men I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
But you really had to know him to get
Yeah.
that sense
Yeah.
of humour, and 90% of people didn't get
Yeah.
his sense of humour, to be fair. But so I think it's just, I would just like to say that it was a huge journey full of sacrifices for Graeme to get to what we see here today, and he deserves every accolade that you're giving him this evening.